This is not a story about heroes. It is not about courage or triumph, or the kind of decisions that earn praise. This is a story about those who did not understand respect, and those who never asked for it. Some were never called by name. Some were treated as instruments, and among them there were those who spoke nothing at all, yet remained. This record was not written to celebrate anyone, nor to conceal what was done in error. It was written simply to remember how far truth can travel when it arrives too late. Respect was not an order. It was not an obligation. It asked for nothing in return. It stood quietly. It did not depart. It endured until the end. Now, the story begins. Faster! The water wagon first! The fire captain's voice tore through the smoke-thick air, a voice already worn ragged, its edges frayed and splitting after hours of unrelenting command. The horses leaned as one into their leather harnesses. The wagon lurched forward with a groan of protesting wood, its barrels swollen with water that sloshed hard against the staves. The unity lasted only a moment. The two laid horses surged ahead with practiced strength, while the pair behind them faltered, their hooves searching for purchase on uncertain ground, their rhythm briefly and dangerously broken. Close up! Bring the wheels in! Iron-rimmed wheels ground forward across earth no longer quite solid. Days of relentless heat had worked the soil open, cracking it wide, while the flames had hollowed it beneath the surface, leaving only a brittle crust. One hoof punched through. The horse stumbled, its eye flashing white, then tore free again in a spray of ash and crumbled earth. Left station teams go in first, another voice cut in from the side. Men from several firehouses had converged at once, drawn together by fire but not yet by plan. Their equipment reflected it. Some wagons carried open wooden casks dulled by soot. Others hauled canvas-wrapped barrels bound tight with rope, secured in whatever manner haste had allowed. The wind shifted. Smoke dropped low and sudden, pressing itself against the ground. The world narrowed. Sight collapsed to an arm's length. The sound of burning timber moved closer, heavier, more insistent. At the edge of the woods, where green life met flame, the fire gathered itself and rose upright, standing tall and close. Cut that tree now, or the road's gone. An axe flashed and came down. The trunk, already half burned through, resisted longer than expected. The first blow bit deep. The second split it open. Burning branches spilled outward as the tree came apart. Horses back! Too late. The tree fell, scraping the side of the wagon. A weakened limb, charred through and still burning, struck one horse hard across the back. The animal reared sharply, its front hooves lifting clear of the ground. The reins snapped taut. The second horse lurched sideways, colliding with its mate. Hold 'em! Hold the horses! Voices overlapped. Orders collided. In the smoke, no one could tell which reins belonged to whom. The line of control broke. Fire rushed into the opening they left behind. The smell of singed hair rose thick through the smoke. Dump the water! Dump it! Ropes came loose. One barrel tipped and spilled its contents. Water struck the scorched ground and vanished in a breath of steam. The fire did not pull back. The wind came again, stronger, carrying the flames straight over the line they had thrown together. "Fall back! All of you! Pull out!" The retreat began unevenly. Men dragged what they could, tools, each other, back from the heat. They tried to lead the horses away, pulling at bridles and calling out, but not everything could move at once. One wagon had slewed sideways, blocking the road. Beside it, a single horse stood trapped, unable to advance or turn. Smoke thickened. Fire curled inward. One firefighter went down. Another seized his coat and hauled him clear. Somewhere in the confusion, a grip on leather reins failed. After that moment, no one could say exactly what happened. The fire kept burning. The orders moved on to the next position. A week had passed. 7 days, long enough for ash to settle, for the wind to carry away the last bitter traces of smoke, for the world to begin forgetting what had burned. 7 days, and the firehouse was moving again, returning to its old rhythms like a heart resuming its beat after a brief arrest. Its doors opened each morning at the same hour they always had, swinging wide to admit the pale early light. Harnesses were returned to their pegs with quiet precision, each leather strap finding its appointed place on the wall as if it had never left. Buckets were stacked where they had always stood, their metal sides catching glints of sunlight. Their arrangement as familiar as prayer. The marks of fire remained, written in darkened boards overhead, preserved in the unusual stiffness of leather that had been heated past its natural give. But no one pointed to them. The smell of smoke still clung to the stable posts, woven deep into the grain of the wood. Black ash lingered in the seams of heavy boots, in the creases where sole met upper, a residue no amount of brushing could fully remove. And yet daily routine resumed its familiar pace. The coffee was strong. The newspaper was thin. The paper lay folded at one end of the long wooden table, its creases pressed deep from repeated handling. The front page carried news from another city. Politics debated in distant chambers, rail schedules adjusted for the coming season, a brief notice of a factory strike miles away. The story of the forest fire had been pushed inward, set among the lesser pages. Turning the paper, one might catch a short paragraph in small type, compressed between advertisements for patent medicines and calls for labor. The fire in the wooded outskirts of the city has been brought under control after 1 week. No human casualties were reported. Losses include several pieces of equipment and 1 horse. The sentence ended there. There was no photograph, no name. The newspaper was folded again. Someone set a cup down upon it. The paper darkened slightly where the liquid soaked through, but no one opened it to dry the page. Another sheet was turned elsewhere. Attention shifted. A sound came from the stable. A saddle was taken down from its hook. The leather had not been scorched, but it had taken in the smell. A hand struck it once, sharply, and dust fell to the floor. The saddle was folded, its stirrups tucked inward, and pushed beneath a low shelf. No one hung it back up. The horses stood in the feed troughs. They lifted their heads, ears turning, then lowered them again. One place remained empty, but no one stood before it to count. The numbers had already been settled. "Training will be held this afternoon." The words were brief. No reason was given. None was required. Reins were coiled. Boots were set to dry. The same movements were repeated as before, only each time the stable was passed, one space stood unfilled. That evening, the firehouse grew quiet a little earlier than usual. Conversation ended sooner than it ordinarily did. Men drifted toward their bunks, carrying with them what had not been said. They lay listening to familiar sounds, the building settling, the wind against the windows. There was no fire that night, no alarm, no smoke. What remained was a newspaper folded and unfolded once too often, a saddle that was never rehung, and a place left empty in the stable, without a word spoken about it, without a name called into the silence. The firehouse moved on, as firehouses must. The stable doors were opened in the morning. The man who opened them did not speak. Instead, he stepped inside carrying a single halter. It was new. The leather had not yet softened to the hand, and there were no creases where it had been folded or worn. As he crossed the threshold, a few of the horses inside lifted their heads briefly, then lowered them again, returning to the quiet rhythm of their standing. Another set of footsteps followed. It was a young horse, not yet fully grown, its body still narrow in the chest, its legs long in a way that suggested they would carry more weight in time. Its coat was black, though not yet deep or even, the kind of black that has not yet decided what it will become. Where the morning light touched it, brown showed through, warm and uncertain. In shadow, the color settled into something darker, nearly absolute, as if the horse were drawing the dimness into itself. The horse paused as it entered the stable. It lowered its head to the packed earth floor, drew in the scent, hay and leather and the accumulated breath of other animals, and brushed once against a timber post, testing its solidity. It did not meet the eyes of the other horses. When the halter tightened slightly, the pressure gentle but insistent, it moved forward again without resistance. "Here." The word was short, almost clipped. A hand pointed toward an empty stall, the one that had stood vacant since the previous week. The place where a saddle had once been hung on a wooden peg, now bare. The place where a feed bucket had been removed, leaving only a faint circular outline in the dust. The young horse was brought to that space. Grain was poured into a wooden trough, the sound of it falling like rain on a roof. A water pail was set down, the metal ringing softly against stone. The horse did not eat at once. It lifted its head, looking once more around the stable, taking in the other stalls, the shafts of light falling through gaps in the walls, the quiet presence of the other horses, then lowered its muzzle to the water and drank first. The surface trembled with each pull of breath, then grew still. One of the firemen stepped closer. He looked down at the horse's neck, at the way the muscles moved beneath the skin, and adjusted the halter with practiced hands. The movement was familiar, efficient, without force. His fingers knew where the buckle should sit, how much give the strap required. "Not easily frightened," he said. The horse did not respond. One ear shifted briefly, catching the sound of the voice, then returned to its place. Its breathing remained even, unbothered. Another man gave a small laugh, more breath than sound. They're all the same once they're standing in front of fire. The remark was not an explanation nor a judgment. It was simply spoken as one might comment on the weather. One man nodded slowly, as if in agreement with something unsaid. Another showed no reaction at all, his attention already elsewhere. That afternoon, the stable sounded as it always did. Hooves striking wood, grain being chewed, the steady grinding of teeth, leather brushing against leather, the creak of a stall door, the low exhale of a horse settling. The young horse existed among those sounds, neither separate nor distinct, one voice in a chorus that required no conductor. No name was spoken. There was no need for one. Only this: the stall was no longer empty. Training followed the same order every morning. When the stable doors opened, the horses were brought out and lined up in a row that had become ritual. Harnesses were lifted into place, their weight familiar and expected. Leather settled against backs with the sound of something returning to its proper position. Buckles closed with small metallic clicks. Reins were drawn tight, tested once, then secured. The sounds were always the same, a working language spoken without words, understood without instruction. No names were called. There was no need to call them. The black horse stood at the end of the line. Someone said, "That one." The horse did not lift his head. His ears remained forward, his body still except for the slow rise and fall of his breathing. The reins were fitted over his neck, the leather cool against his coat. A wagon was hitched behind him, the traces fastened with the practiced efficiency of hands that had done this work countless times before. Picks and shovels were loaded first, then saws with long wooden handles worn smooth by years of use. Iron struck iron as the tools were arranged. The weight was clear, substantial, deliberate, but it was not explained. "He can pull it alone." There was no confirmation, no question. The statement hung in the air like something already decided. The black horse lowered his body into the harness, leaning forward until the traces went taut and the wagon moved. The first steps were uneven, his hooves searching for purchase in the loose dirt. Then the pace settled. Hooves pressed into the ground with purpose. The sound became regular, a measured cadence that matched the rhythm of labor itself. Training repeated: incline, halt, turn, move again. Orders were always short, delivered at the same height of voice, neither raised nor softened. When the reins were pulled, the horse stopped, his body settling back into itself. When they were released, he moved forward again, his shoulders pushing against the collar. The black horse kept the same rhythm as the others, no faster, no slower. No more attention was given to him than to any other, no less. Near midday, something happened as the wagon was being brought to a stop. The black horse misstepped with a hind leg. Only for a moment. There was no loud sound. The wagon did not tip or fall. But when the hoof met the ground again, the movement came back a fraction late, as if the leg had briefly forgotten its work. "All right?" someone asked, but did not wait for an answer. "Looks fine to me." The black horse steadied himself, shifting his weight across the other 3 legs. His breathing remained even. Training continued. A short while later, Robert came over. He did not take the reins or call for the horse to stop. He lowered himself instead and looked at the leg, not with his hands, but with his eyes. He did not touch it. He watched the way the muscles moved beneath the skin, the slight shift of weight, the angle at which the hoof met the ground. His gaze was steady and unhurried, the kind of looking that takes notice without demanding response. He said nothing. One of the horse's ears flicked once. Robert saw it. He raised his hand and passed it once over the horse's head, briefly without ceremony. His palm made contact, then withdrew. The touch was neither comfort nor command. It simply occurred. He did not linger. He did not speak the horse's name. "Carry on." That was enough. Training continued through the afternoon. The black horse pulled the wagon the full course, up the incline where dirt gave way to gravel, around the wide turn where the wagon bed swayed slightly, back down to the level ground before the stable. The tools were unloaded and returned to their places, each set where it belonged. The leg moved again without drawing notice, its rhythm restored. As the sun lowered toward the roof line, casting long shadows across the yard, the harness was removed. Robert did not look again at the horse's back. He turned instead to the wagon, checking the axle and the joints where wood met iron. One piece of iron after another was taken down, examined, set aside. The noise of work thinned, giving way to the quieter sounds of evening. The black horse remained in the stable. After that day, training did not change. Orders did not change. No names were spoken. Only this did. Whenever Robert passed by, whether leading another horse or carrying tools or simply crossing the yard, he looked once more at the black horse's leg, not with concern, not with doubt, but with the kind of attention that notices what others overlook and remembers what others choose to forget. There was no call that day. Morning at the firehouse began as it always did, with routine unfolding like a map already drawn. The doors were open to let in the cool air and the slanted light of early sun. Equipment was inspected with the kind of attention that comes from repetition made sacred. The horses were led out of the stable one by one, their hooves striking the packed earth in a rhythm that marked the beginning of work. The black horse stood among them. A halter was set in place, the leather passing over his ears and settling beneath his jaw. The saddle was lifted, heavier than it looked, shaped by years of use, and laid across his back with care. When the leather touched his coat, still cool from the morning, the horse drew one slow breath that filled his chest and held it for a moment, then released. He remained still, his body accepting the weight as if it had always been there. Robert entered the stable later than usual. He looked over the line of horses, his gaze moving from one to the next with the practiced efficiency of someone who could read health and temperament in the angle of an ear or the set of a shoulder. He paused briefly in front of the black one. He stopped, but he did not speak to him. He only ran his hand along the saddle straps, checking that they were properly fastened, his fingers testing each buckle without needing to look. "Keep it light today." Someone said it aloud from the doorway, where the shadows still held. Robert nodded, a single dip of his chin. The drill was simple. The water barrels were empty, left that way intentionally. No wagons were hitched. No tools were loaded. This was not practice for emergency, but for precision, for the small adjustments that kept everything working when it mattered most. The horses walked in a wide circle around the training yard, their bodies leaning slightly into the curve. Then the signal came, and they changed direction, crossing the space they had just traced. The black horse moved at the same pace as the others, his stride neither hurried nor reluctant, his breathing steady. He did not pull ahead. He did not fall behind. He existed in the middle of the movement, part of something larger than himself. It was at the signal to halt. The black horse lifted his head slightly, not in alarm, but in attention. An ear shifted backward, then forward again, listening. His breathing settled evenly, his ribs expanding and contracting in a rhythm that suggested calm. Watching this, Robert held the reins loosely in his hands and said, "Black." It was not a call meant to summon. It was not a command meant to direct. It was simply a word that fell where it stood, like something dropped without thinking. The black horse did not respond. He did not move toward the sound or turn his head to find its source. Only his ear shifted once more, a small acknowledgment that something had been spoken, then returned to its place. "Continue." The drill resumed as if nothing had been interrupted. No one repeated the word. No one asked what it meant. In a place where so much depended on clarity and speed, some things were allowed to exist without explanation. By midday, the horses were returned to the stable. Feed was poured into the wooden troughs, the grain fallen with a sound like distant rain. Fresh water was drawn from the pump outside, the handle creaking as it moved, and carried in pails that sloshed slightly with each step. The black horse drank first, lowering his muzzle into the water until it touched the surface and sent small ripples outward. Then he lowered his head to the grain, chewing slowly, methodically. Another horse brushed against him from the side, a bay mare with a white star, but he did not react. He simply continued eating, unbothered by the proximity. Robert stood with his back against a wooden post, his arms crossed, and watched for a moment. It was not long, just enough to see that everything was as it should be. He turned away and went back to his work, to the endless tasks that kept a firehouse running even when there was no fire to fight. The afternoon drill was shorter: halt, forward, turn. The commands came in the same measured voice they always did, spoken not to individual horses, but to the collective body they had become through training. Black, back. The word was spoken again, without intention. as if the mouth had grown accustomed to the shape of it. The black horse turned with the others, his body pivoting smoothly on his hindquarters. He did not move faster than was required. He did not hesitate or question. He simply turned, and in turning, completed what had been asked. The drill ended as it always did, not with ceremony, but with a quiet satisfaction of work completed properly. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, turning the sky to brass and shadow, the saddles were removed. Dust was brushed from the black horse's coat with long, even strokes. It was Robert's hand that held the brush, once along the neck, once across the shoulder, once down the length of the back. It did not linger. It did not need to. Before leaving the stable, Robert closed the door, securing the latch with a motion so automatic it required no thought. Then he looked back inside, through the gap where the wood did not quite meet. "Same time tomorrow." The black horse did not lift his head. He simply stood in his stall, breathing in the gathering darkness, his body a shape among shapes, his presence neither announced nor withdrawn. That day, nothing happened. No fire, no emergency, no injury or test or moment that would be remembered. Only this: a name left behind without explanation, where it had fallen, like a seed that does not know yet if it will take root. The summer air was already dry. Even in the early morning, there was no coolness left in it, no relief, no mercy. When a man drew breath, his throat scraped as though lined with dust and sand, each inhalation a small violence. The packed earth of the stable floor crumbled beneath the boots, breaking into pale powder that rose in small clouds and settled again. Each time a horse shifted its weight, the sound was dull and brittle, as if bone had touched bone, as if the earth itself had forgotten how to yield. The water trough stood lower than it should have. The horses drank more often, lowering their heads with urgency, lifting them to breathe, their flanks rising and falling with visible effort. Their coats had lost some of their luster, dulled by the heat and the dust that seemed to coat everything. That was when it happened. "Hold there! Don't move!" One of the firemen called out sharply, his voice cutting through the ordinary sounds of morning. Near the feed bins, along the far wall of the stable, where the shadows pooled deepest, something slid across the ground, slow, deliberate, almost indistinguishable from the color of the dirt itself. A living thing moving with ancient patience. "Damn it," someone muttered, the words barely above a whisper. "A rattler." It was a rattlesnake. Its hide blended with the earth so well it was nearly invisible unless it moved, scales the color of dust and stone, patterned like the dried mud of a creek bed. The body coiled inward, drawn tight into itself, muscle compressing into a shape both beautiful and terrible. The rattle sounded faintly, dry, hollow, like seeds shaken in a gourd. One of the horses startled, lifting a hoof sharply before the halter checked it, the leather creaking with sudden tension. "That thing strikes a horse's leg, we're finished," a man said, his voice low and urgent. "Kill it, quickly." Voices rose at once, overlapping, urgent. One fireman reached for a club kept near the stall door, a length of oak worn smooth by handling. Another searched for the iron hook that hung on a nail, his hands moving fast. The horses stood tied in place, reins pulled short and secured to iron rings, their breathing turning sharp and uneven. Ears swiveled, nostrils flared. The smell of fear began to rise, something sour and animal. Someone hold that horse steady. The first blow came down. It missed. The club struck the ground where the snake had been a fraction of a second before, sending up a small explosion of dust. Damn! The snake tightened further, then lunged sideways with shocking speed, its body uncoiling like a released spring. A horse threw its head up, eyes white-rimmed, before it was forced back down again by strong hands. Someone cursed aloud, a string of words that had no other purpose than to release what could not be held. It's getting away, the second strike landed. The snake lifted from the ground, flung through the air in a wide arc, and struck the wooden post beside the stall with a dull, meaty sound before dropping into the dirt. Its body writhed once, twice, then slowly went still. Did you see that? The man holding the club grinned, breathing hard, sweat beading on his forehead despite the early hour. That's how it's done. A few others laughed under their breath, nervous laughter, the kind that comes after danger is past. The tension loosened, if only for a moment, like a rope allowed to slacken after bearing weight. Should skin it and hang it on the wall, someone joked, already bending to examine the snake's length. Frame it like a trophy. The rattlesnake was caught with a hook and pushed into a burlap sack, its weight surprisingly heavy. The sound stopped once the mouth of the sack was tied shut with twine. The horses slowly began to steady themselves, their breathing easing from panicked snorts to something closer to normal. Ears returned to their natural position. Hooves stopped stamping. In the midst of it all, Robert crossed the length of the stable. He looked over the horses one by one as he passed, reading them with the kind of attention most men reserved for reading words. When he reached the black horse, he paused, only briefly, but with intention. He did not speak. He did not lay a hand on the animal. He only looked, his gaze moving from the horse's eyes to his stance to the set of his shoulders. Black did not move. One ear flicked back once, acknowledging the presence beside him, then returned to its place. His breathing was steady. His legs were planted. Whatever fear to others had felt, he had not taken it into himself. Robert saw this. He nodded once, to himself perhaps, then moved on. "Clear it up," someone said. Men drifted back to their duties. The stable settled again into its usual sounds, leather creaking, hooves shifting, low voices conferring about ordinary things. The morning resumed its familiar shape. Then the bell rang, a moment of stillness, as if the world itself had paused to listen. It did not stop. The sound poured through the open doors like water through a broken dam. Each strike of the bell measured and relentless. 11 times, 12, 13. Men stopped what they were doing and counted silently, their faces changing as the number grew. "Hell," someone said quietly, the word falling like a stone into deep water. "That's a big one." The men moved at once, transformed by purpose. Halters were loosed with practiced speed. Horses were brought into line, their bodies pressing close as they were led forward. The wagon was drawn out from where it stood against the wall, its wheels creaking as they began to turn. Iron was loaded onto it, axes with edges honed sharp, shovels with handles worn smooth, saws with teeth that caught the light, metal striking metal with dry, hollow sounds that rang through the stable like smaller echoes of the bell still tolling outside. Outside, beyond the stable doors, the wind had begun to rise. Not the gentle stirring of morning air, but something with weight and direction, a wind that carried intention. It moved through the streets with purpose, bending the dry grass, lifting dust into spirals that rose and dissolved. This time, its direction was unmistakable. It was blowing toward the town, toward wood and thatch and all the things that burned. The bell kept ringing. The horses were harnessed. The men climbed aboard. The doors were thrown wide. And the black horse, standing in his place at the end of the line, lowered his body into the traces and prepared to pull toward whatever was burning. When they reached the site, it was already too late. The road below the ridge was crowded with wagons and men, too many bodies, too much equipment, and no single order guiding them. Crews from different firehouses had arrived ahead of one another, each following their own captains, their own habits. Some dragged canvas water casks uphill, shoulders bent beneath the weight. Others hacked at the dry ground with shovels, trying to cut a line where the fire might slow, where it might hesitate and stop. Orders came from everywhere. They overlapped. They collided. They dissolved into noise. It's already crossed over, the fire had crested the ridge. Flames climbed the hill like something alive, then spilled down the far side toward the village below. Several houses were already burning. Roofs caught first, the dry wood eager, almost willing. Walls followed. Windows shattered from heat alone, sharp cracks swallowed by the roar of the fire. Then the wind came. Not a drifting wind, a deciding wind. The flames moved with it, sideways and fast. Fire did not only rise, it ran. It leapt across spaces that should have held. It ignored distance. It ignored sense. "Water! Get the water up here!" Casks were emptied and dragged forward again. Horses strained in their harnesses, sides heaving, foam gathering at their mouths. Water struck the fire and turned instantly to steam. For a moment, white clouds rose, then cleared. The fire remained. "Is there a brake line?" No one answered. Perhaps no one knew. Perhaps everyone did. The fire had already divided itself, spreading in more than one direction. Trees fell with deep, hollow sounds. Trunks weakened from within. Burning branches broke loose and scattered embers across ground that had been untouched only seconds before. Then something changed. A narrow column of ash lifted from the ground. At first it seemed small, almost harmless. Then heat pulled the air inward. The column thickened. Embers rose together, spinning higher. "There!" someone pointed. The embers landed far off. After a brief pause, flames bloomed again where they fell. It's spreading. Men hesitated, not from fear, but from calculation. "Hold to the wind side," the captain shouted, his voice raw. "Work it from the flank." The crews split. On one side, water was thrown to slow the edge. On the other, men dug hard, stripping the ground bare. Sweat mixed with ash. Breaths shortened. No one believed the fire could be stopped. Perhaps it could only be slowed. Perhaps only guided away from what still mattered. Another house collapsed inward, flames rising higher in its place. The wind shifted again, lower now, faster, carrying the smell of burning wood and other things not meant to burn. "Hold your ground," but everyone knew. This fire had grown beyond control. It no longer behaved like an accident. It moved like weather. The horses stood where they were, heads low, ears pinned back. Wagons were angled toward retreat. Iron fittings rattled. Many water casks stood empty. Before the flames, no one moved with certainty. Not the captains, not the men, not the horses. Only one thing was clear. Stopping was not an option. There was only forward, toward the fire, toward the smoke, toward whatever came next. The black horse stood in his traces. His breathing was steady. His legs were planted. His eyes did not turn away. And when the order came, he would move. Not because he was fearless, but because this was the work he had been trained to do. Robert and Jack were assigned to the same line. The horses stood in order, reins slack but ready. This section of the work was handled by 3 men. No more could be spared. Robert stepped forward first and came to Black. He did not remove his helmet. He placed his hand on the horse's face, fingers resting between the eyes. His palm moved once, slowly, then stopped. He did not linger. "We'll be going in soon." The words were not meant for anyone in particular. They were spoken into the smoke. Orders followed. "Clear the embers here. Hold the line." Shovels struck the ground. The soil split easily, dry and brittle. Charred roots were cut away. Water was poured, already too little. Ash pressed down glowed faintly beneath the surface. Then the wind paused, not stopped, held, and a sound came, short, broken, human. Jack heard it first. "Did you hear that?" Robert did not answer. He was watching the smoke ahead, how it moved inward, pulled toward something. "It's inside," Jack said. "Robert, wait." Robert pulled the reins. Black stepped forward at once. "No." Jack reached out, but Robert did not turn. The heat arrived without warning. The air pressed down, heavy and close. Breathing scraped the throat. Smoke erased distance. Time thinned. There was only the next step, and the sound of Robert's breath inside his helmet. Flame crossed their path, not above or beside, but straight ahead. Heat surged. Black lifted, startled. Balance broke. Robert was thrown, then struck the ground. Darkness followed. When Robert opened his eyes, smoke lay thick around him. Breath came hard. His chest burned. He coughed and rolled. Black stood nearby, still, uninjured. When Robert moved, the horse responded. He stepped in, close. Hot breath. A rough tongue brushed Robert's face, once, then again. That was enough. Robert caught hold of Black's neck and pulled himself up. He mounted again, lower this time, pressed close. The reins tightened. They moved deeper. Black ran. The ground gave way beneath each step, ash collapsing, embers leaping up. Fire brushed his legs. Pain flashed sharp beneath the skin. He did not stop. The sound was closer now, breathing, human breathing. Robert lowered himself further, fingers tangled in the mane. Direction shifted. Black followed. Fire burst beside them. Something burning fell from above, close enough to stir the air. They ran. No command was given, no force from the reins, only this. The man on his back had come for him before. The hand on his face had been gentle. That was enough. He would not stop. And then the world narrowed to one thing, the sound of someone breathing. The sound was directly ahead. Short, broken breaths, now unmistakable, rising above the roar of flame and the crack of burning wood. Between the walls of fire there was movement. Black shifted his course slightly, angling toward it with instinct that bypassed thought. Heat poured sideways from a collapsing structure, warping the air. Robert's weight wavered. His arm tightened around the horse's neck. There, through the fire, a man came into view. He was crouched low, one arm raised to shield his face. The other hung useless at his side, sleeve burned away. Smoke climbed and swallowed the scene, then thinned again. Black did not stop. He drove forward. The instant his hoof struck near the fallen man, the ground gave way. One leg sank into burning debris, ash and embers collapsing under weight. Pain rose all at once, sharp and total. His body tilted, then righted itself. Forward. There was only forward. Robert lowered his body across Black's neck and reached. The man looked up, soot and pain masking his face. Hands met. Robert pulled. The man was dragged against Black's side. The weight increased suddenly. Balance faltered. "All right?" The voice did not finish. Smoke swallowed it. Black twisted to compensate. Fire surged behind them. Ahead, a narrow opening appeared. He drove toward it. His hooves found uneven ground, one solid, one empty. His leg met fire again. This time it lasted. Flame worked through hair and skin. A tearing sensation climbed beneath the flesh. One hind leg faltered, refusing command. His body lurched. Robert pressed closer, grip unbroken. Black did not stop. He ran. There was no reason why. There was no reason to stop. The wind shifted. Flames poured sideways. Burning branches fell. One scraped across Black's back, dragging heat along his spine. Hair curled and burned. The smell changed. No longer wood alone. The air opened. People appeared beyond the smoke. Firefighters, horses, wagons. The edge of the fire. "Here!" Many voices, urgent and relieved. Black drove forward one last time. His hoof found solid earth. He stopped. A deep breath entered, hot, painful, then left in a long exhale. The weight slid from his back. Robert dismounted first, legs unsteady. Then the man was pulled away by waiting hands, rough, bare, urgent. "We've got him!" A shout. Laughter, sharp and wild. A curse that sounded like prayer. Black did not understand. He breathed. Each breath shorter than the last. One leg would not bear weight. His body swayed. He tried to remain standing by will alone. This time, it was not enough. The front legs folded, slowly, then the rest followed. The massive body gave in. The ground tipped. Black fell onto his flank. Heat lingered. Pain stabbed beneath the skin, sharp then dull, then sharp again. Each breath burned inside his chest. His view dropped low. Boots and movement filled his sight. Robert's face came close. A hand touched Black's face. This time it did not hurry. It touched again and did not withdraw. It stayed. Around them chaos continued, horses screaming, voices overlapping, words fallen in urgent conference. Black did not hear them. Sensation left his leg, not pain, which remained, but awareness. Heat stayed. Something else joined it. Weight. He breathed in with effort. He breathed again, slower, shallower. His eye found Robert's face and held it. No understanding, only recognition. The hand, the voice, the presence. Robert leaned close. "You did it," he said, breaking. "You brought him back." Black's ear flickered once. His breathing continued, each cycle a small victory, each one perhaps the last. The fire burned on, indifferent. But here, on trampled earth, a man knelt beside a fallen horse and bore witness to what courage looked like when it wore a black coat and stood on 4 legs, and refused even now to let go. The fire had stepped back. It was not extinguished, not yet, but it no longer pressed forward with its former hunger. Smoke lay low over the ground, settling into the hollows like fog at dawn, and the wind, for a time, seemed to have forgotten its direction. Men stood upon the scorched earth and drew breath where they could. Shovels were lowered. Buckets lay empty at their feet, their tin sides blackened and warm to the touch. Black lay on the ground. His body did not move, though breath still passed through him, uneven, uncertain, each intake shallower than the one before. One leg rested at an unnatural angle. His coat was burned flat in places, the hair fused together in dark patches, the smell of singe still clinging to him. Beneath the skin, heat remained, slow to leave. Robert knelt beside the horse. He looked at him, at the leg first, then back to the body as a whole. His hand moved, then stopped, suspended in the smoke-thick air, uncertain where it ought to rest. At last, he took hold of the horse's face, his palm settling against cheek and jaw. He did not grip him tightly. There was no force in it, only presence. Men gathered nearby. One looked at the broken leg and said nothing. Another turned back toward the fire line. One opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Words fell and stopped. Sentences did not finish. Robert did not lift his head. The horse's breath reached his hand, hot at first, then less so, each rise and fall weaker than the last. Black's eye remained open, reflecting only the gray sky and the shape of the man beside him. For a brief moment, only once, the breathing steadied. Then a shot rang out. The sound did not linger. It cracked across the burnt ground and was absorbed by ash and silence. No one spoke. The men held their places, hats still on their heads. Robert remained beside Black a little longer, then rose slowly to his feet. Smoke still hung in the air. Beyond the ridge, the fire was moving again. Someone gathered tools. Another pointed toward the next position. The work was passing on. Black remained where he was. Still at last, released from pain, a dark shape against darker ground, gone into the earth he had defended. Night came down slowly. It did not fall all at once, but descended by degrees, like a curtain lowered by invisible hands. The fire had not vanished entirely, but it no longer ruled the ground with its former tyranny. The flames had drawn back into themselves, breaking into smaller tongues that clung stubbornly to fallen timber and blackened brush, glowing like embers in a dying hearth. Smoke settled low, pressed flat by the cooling air, drifting now and then as the wind shifted its course, carrying with it the scent of ash and exhaustion. Men walked again upon the earth, their movements slower now, deliberate. Footprints overlapped in the soot, then softened, then disappeared beneath the gathering dark. The work turned toward order. Shovels were gathered and stacked against wagon wheels, their blades dulled and scored. Pick heads were lowered to the soil and left there, standing like markers in a field of battle. Empty water barrels were rolled aside, their iron hoops clicking faintly as they came to rest. A small music in the silence. Someone called for the ledger, his voice carrying across the clearing. Another man turned a wagon by hand, boots braced in the ash, shoulders set against the weight. The horses were led off in the opposite direction, their heads low, their steps uncertain on the uneven ground. Reins loosened. Hoof beats faded into the distance until they were indistinguishable from the wind. Robert remained where he was. He was not standing. He was not seated. He occupied some place between the two, a posture without name, suspended where motion ends and stillness has not yet begun. His hands held nothing now, yet his palms were open, fingers slightly curved, as if they still remembered the warmth that had been there, the heat of a living thing, the pulse beneath skin, the trust that passes between man and animal without words. A man passed beside him. He glanced down, then away. He did not speak. After a while, how long, Robert could not say, he straightened. The movement was slow, requiring effort, as if his body had grown heavier in stillness. He lifted his helmet from the ground and brushed the dust from its crown with careful strokes. With the back of his hand, he wiped the ash from his face, leaving dark streaks where sweat and soot had mixed. He looked once across the scene, the path the fire had taken, the pressed grass lying flat in waves, the collapsed fence line leaning toward ruin. All of it had already begun to slip into what came next, into memory, into the past that gathers quietly behind every present moment. The place where the horse had stood was empty. There was no marker there, no rope, no cloth tied to a branch, nothing placed to name it, nothing set apart to claim it as sacred ground. It lay only a little removed from where the other horses had been held, distinguished by nothing except the knowing. Robert paused before it just briefly, his gaze resting on the trampled earth. Then he turned away. "We're moving." Someone said it, not a question, not a request, not an explanation. The men began to walk again, forming a loose column across the darkening field. Equipment was shouldered. Voices rose and fell, speaking of small things, necessary things, where to meet, what needed mending, who would return at dawn. The ground was cleared. The night deepened, spreading its indigo across the sky like ink through water. Robert took his place at the end of the line. He did not look back. There was no reason to. The day's work had ended. The particular crisis had passed, and fire was already preparing itself elsewhere, gathering in places not yet named, waiting for wind, for chance, for human error. A few stars appeared overhead. They showed through the smoke, then vanished again as the haze shifted. Robert did not count them. He did not search for patterns. He did not look for meaning. He simply walked on. And in the end, only one line remained, not carved in stone, not written in any ledger, but held in the quiet chamber of memory where such things are kept, in a memory that cannot be erased. Robert, 1914.